Hi. In today's lesson, we're going to carefully break down several important cost concepts. Let's start with private cost. Private costs are the costs directly paid by producers or consumers involved in an economic activity. So private costs is the cost borne by the individual or firm making the decision. Imagine a bakery producing bread. The bakery must pay for flour, sugar, electricity, workers' wages, and rent. And all of these are private costs because the bakery itself pays for them. In similar ways, if you drive your car, you pay for petrol, insurance, repairs, and those are your private costs of driving. So private cost is the cost to the decision maker. Now, let's move on to external cost. An external cost is a cost suffered by a third party who is not directly involved in an economic transaction. This is extremely important. It means someone else is affected by an economic transaction, even though they're not buying, not selling the product. And let's go back to the bakery example. Suppose that the bakery produces smoke that pollutes the air. Nearby residents may suffer dirty windows, breathing problems, lower quality of life, and the residents are not buying the bread, they're not producing the bread, but they suffer from the pollution. So that pollution is an external cost on the community. Similarly, when you drive, you pay for petrol, which is the private cost, but you also create air pollution and perhaps traffic congestion. Other people might suffer from traffic delays, carbon emissions, and noise pollution, and those are the external costs. So external cost is the cost to third parties. And now let's combine private cost and external cost to have social cost. So social cost is the total cost to society from an economic activity. It is the sum of private cost and external cost. So when a factory pollutes, the wages and the materials are private costs, but the pollution damage is the external cost. Together, they form the social cost. Think of social cost as the true cost to society, not just the cost captured, internalized by the producers. Producers often ignore external costs because they don't pay for them directly. Now, let's move on to marginal concepts. The word marginal means one extra unit. Marginal private cost is the additional private cost of producing one more unit of output. If producing the 100th loaf of bread costs the bakery an extra £2 in ingredients and labor, then marginal cost of producing the 100th loaf would be £2. It is the cost to the firm of producing one more unit. Now, let's draw the diagram for marginal private cost with price or cost on the vertical axis and quantity of output on the horizontal axis. The marginal private cost curve is upward sloping because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. As a firm increases output, it may face capital constraints. As more variable inputs, such as labor, are added to a fixed input, such as land, or a fixed amount of capital, the additional units of output gradually decreases. For example, in a small bakery, the first few workers are very productive, but as more workers are hired, the kitchen becomes crowded and eventually overcrowded. They get in each other's way, and productivity falls gradually, so the cost of producing each additional loaf rises. Therefore, the marginal private cost increases as output increases. That is why MPC curve, the marginal private cost curve, slopes upwards. Now, marginal external cost is the external cost created by producing one more unit of output. If producing one more ton of steel creates additional pollution that causes £5 worth of health damage, then the marginal external costs would be £5. And this is the cost that is not borne, not paid by the firm. It is imposed on others. And marginal social cost is the total cost to society of producing one more unit of output. And marginal social cost is the sum of marginal private cost and marginal external cost. So marginal social cost includes both the firm's internalized extra production cost and the extra harm caused to society, but is not internalized by the firm. And now let's draw a second diagram where marginal social cost is above marginal private cost for every unit of output. Here, marginal social cost lies above MPC, marginal private cost, signifying that there is external costs arising from production. Since marginal social cost is the sum of marginal private cost and marginal external cost, if marginal external cost is positive, meaning extra harm is caused, then marginal social cost must be higher than marginal private cost. Consider a coal power station. For each extra unit of electricity, the firm pays wages and fuel costs. That's marginal private cost in the diagram, but it also creates pollution, climate change, climate damage, and health problems. That's the marginal external cost arising from the production. So the true cost to society is higher than the firm's internalized private cost. And the vertical distance between marginal social cost and marginal private cost represents the marginal external cost. And the gap shows the size of the external cost per extra unit produced. The bigger the gap, the larger the extent, the external damage. This situation happens when we have negative externalities of production. For example, pollution from factories, traffic congestions, and plastic waste production. Now, let's draw a third diagram with marginal private cost above marginal social cost for every unit of output. When marginal private cost is above marginal social cost, there is external benefit of production. Now, we know that marginal social cost is the sum of marginal private cost and marginal external cost. But now, marginal external cost is negative, meaning that there is marginal external benefit. So MSC becomes lower than MPC. Education is a great example for this. When a university educates one more student, the university pays teaching costs, that is marginal private cost. But society benefits because the graduate earns more. They pay more tax, and they are less likely to commit crimes. They contribute skills to the economy, and those are the external cost of production. So the true cost to society is actually lower than the cost faced by the university, by the producer. And the vertical gap between marginal private cost and marginal social cost now represents the marginal external benefit of production. Now, let's summarize everything clearly. Private cost would be the cost to the decision makers themselves, while external costs are costs to third parties, and social cost would be a sum of private and external costs. When we introduce the marginal concept, marginal private cost is the extra cost to producer, and marginal external cost would be the extra cost to third parties, while marginal social cost is the sum of marginal private and external cost. And whenever there is a negative externality of production, marginal social cost curve lies above marginal private cost curve. And if there's positive externality of production, marginal social cost lies below marginal private cost curve. And the vertical gap between MSC and MPC always represents the marginal external effect. It's either the cost or the benefit.